Ed Sullivan had the power to make or break music careers for over 2 decades, but some performers broke his strict rules on live TV and never got invited back. Others challenged his authority or refused to follow the rules and network policies. One guest even flipped him off live. These are the 12 musicians Ed Sullivan hated most. Number 1. Jackie Mason.
A Gentile saw me by the name of Ed Sullivan, and he loved me. He watched me perform at my first audition, and he got so excited. He was shocked. So shocked that the rest of his life, he walked around like this.
Mason's controversy happened because the show was being cut short for a presidential address in 1964, and everything was running behind schedule that night. Sullivan was standing off camera frantically signaling for Mason to wrap up his comedy routine immediately so they could cut to the president. Mason ignored Sullivan's hand signals and flipped the script by giving him the middle finger, which got big laughs from the audience who could see what was happening. Sullivan reportedly stood there furious live in front of millions. Mason denied it completely and said the gesture was totally misunderstood and taken out of context. It didn't matter what Mason said afterward in his defense. Sullivan treated it as a personal insult delivered in front of the entire country and banned him immediately from ever appearing again on the show. Jackie eventually sued Ed for $3 million shortly after alleging that his public accusations of obscene gestures had defamed his character and ruined his livelihood, eventually winning the case with reports indicating he was cleared of the accusation. Unfortunately, no footage of the incident was ever archived. Number 2. Bo Diddley. Ed's beef with Bo Diddley was over control of his performance and what actually got broadcasted. Sullivan and his producers expected a specific song, and Diddley did something completely different on air, which disrupted the entire planned flow of the show. Diddley was specifically asked to perform 16 Tons, but instead launched into his own signature song, Bo Diddley, without warning anyone backstage. Sullivan saw it as a deliberate bait-and-switch act of defiance on live TV. Diddley later described Sullivan as absolutely furious backstage after the performance, and claimed Sullivan said something racially charged in the heat of the moment. Regardless of the exact wording, multiple accounts from staffers said Sullivan felt double-crossed and humiliated. After that incident, Diddley was not welcomed back to the show ever again despite his growing popularity. It became a famous example of Sullivan's strict insistence that acts follow his show's rules precisely or face permanent consequences. In Sullivan's mind, the guest didn't get to change the plan without permission, no matter how talented. Number 3. Elvis Presley. Sullivan initially didn't want Elvis anywhere near his show and made that clear publicly to reporters and industry insiders. He told reporters Elvis was, quote, "not my cup of tea" and wasn't fit for family entertainment, which sounds absolutely insane now, but you have to remember how controversial Elvis was back then. The backlash from Elvis's other TV appearances had become widespread across the U.S. Parents were calling networks about his hip movements, churches were condemning him every Sunday, and conservative groups were organizing protests. Sullivan wanted no part in that controversy. But when other shows booked Elvis and completely destroyed Sullivan's ratings week after week, the decision became purely financial. Sullivan ultimately booked Elvis anyway, despite all his previous public statements, and famously shot him only from the waist up to avoid showing his hip movements on camera. It was Sullivan trying to have it both ways in the most obvious manner. Get the massive ratings boost but maintain the family-friendly image that advertisers ordered. Number 4. Bob Dylan. Dylan was booked to sing Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues in 1963, and by many accounts, Sullivan himself was fine with it at rehearsal. The song was controversial and satirical about the conservative political group, but Sullivan allowed it. Then CBS stepped in at the last minute over legal and defamation worries tied to the John Birch Society. The network told Dylan he needed to change the song before airtime to avoid a lawsuit. Dylan refused and walked off the set rather than compromise his artistic vision. Staffers on set years later allegedly said this pissed Ed off. The whole thing made him look weak because he couldn't control either side of the conflict. This became part of Dylan's public image as an uncompromising artist who wouldn't bend for anybody. Number 5. The Rolling Stones. Sullivan and CBS demanded a lyric change from "let's spend the night together" to "let's spend some time together," treating it as non-negotiable for a family broadcast in 1967. The original lyric was too suggestive for television standards. The band complied only for the exposure, but the whole point was that they visibly didn't want to compromise. Mick Jagger famously played it up with an eye roll while delivering the approved line, making sure everyone knew they were being censored. Contemporary write-ups and later retrospectives frame it as Sullivan enforcing standards and the Stones testing the boundary without outright refusing. It became one of the most famous moments of network television censorship in rock history. The eye roll was Jagger's way of saying, "this is BS," without actually walking off the show like Dylan did. Sullivan got what he wanted technically, but the Stones made him look like an out-of-touch square in the process. Young viewers watching at home understood exactly what what was happening. Their parents probably didn't even catch the eye roll. The incident showed the generation gap in American culture. Sullivan represented the old guard, trying to maintain standards, while rock and roll was pushing every boundary it could find. The Stones came back for future appearances, so Sullivan didn't ban them permanently. But the lyric change became legendary as an example of television's moral panic over rock music. Enjoying the video so far? If so, hit the subscribe button below your screen. Now back to the video. Number 6. The Doors. Before airtime in 1967, the show required Jim Morrison to change the line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," because it read as an obvious drug reference that wouldn't pass standards for a family broadcast. The band indicated they would comply with the edit and promised to change it. Then they performed the lyrics exactly as written anyway without any changes. Multiple retellings say Sullivan considered that a direct act of defiance and betrayal on live television. They were told backstage immediately after the performance they would never be invited back to the show. In other words, the reason wasn't that the Doors were bad musicians. It was refusing to follow a last-minute standards directive on live television. This is one of the clearest examples of Sullivan's ironclad rule. You agree to the edit, or you're done forever with no second chances. Morrison knew exactly what he was doing when he sang that line. He looked right into the camera and said it anyway. Sullivan took it personally as a calculated insult to his authority. The Doors became legends partly because of moments like this. Number 7. Buddy Holly. The recurring theme with Buddy Holly is that he didn't take orders the way Sullivan expected from young performers. Accounts say Sullivan wanted him to swap out or tone down "Oh Boy" because it was too wild and suggestive for the family audience. Holly refused to change his set or compromise his performance. After that decision, stories describe Sullivan retaliating in small but pointed ways during the actual broadcast, cutting the performance slot down shorter than planned, mispronouncing Holly's name on purpose during the introduction, allegedly having the guitar and amp feed turned down so the music sounded quieter. Multiple accounts treat the incident as a real clash over control and presentation. Sullivan didn't like being challenged by a kid from Texas who thought his music was more important than network television standards. Holly's refusal to comply made him a problem guest, even though the audience loved his performance. What made this situation particularly frustrating for Holly was that he was already a rising star with hit records on the radio. The tension between them was visible on camera if you knew what to look for. Sullivan's introduction was cold and dismissive. The fact that Holly would die in a plane crash just months later in February 1959 makes Sullivan's petty behavior even more tragic. Holly never got another chance to prove himself on Sullivan's stage. Number 8. Paul Draper. In January 1950, Sullivan booked singer and tap dancer Paul Draper. Then anti-communist activist Hester McCullough accused him of being a communist sympathizer and pushed Sullivan's lead sponsor Ford to cancel the appearance. Draper went on anyway, because Ed initially stood by the booking. The sponsor reportedly received over 1,000 angry letters afterward from viewers outraged about alleged communist ties. Sullivan then had to reassure Ford's ad agency that he'd avoid controversial guests going forward to keep the sponsorship money flowing. That private agreement effectively made Draper radioactive for U.S. TV bookings overnight. Draper's opportunities in America dried up almost completely, and he was pushed to work abroad just to survive. It's one of the clearest examples of Sullivan getting squeezed between politics and sponsors, and a performer's career getting destroyed in the crossfire. He chose the money over defending a guest. The Red Scare mentality meant that even accusations without proof could end careers. Number 9. The Byrds. The Byrds looked like an obvious repeat booking after their successful 1965 appearance performing Mr. Tambourine Man on the show. But they became a one-and-done act because David Crosby got into a blow-up with the show's director and production staff. Chris Hillman later said, "Crosby got into an argument with the director and we were never asked back," which is about as straightforward as it gets. Crosby himself admitted years later he nearly blew a massive career moment by losing his temper. The details of exactly what set him off aren't fully documented, but multiple band members confirmed the clash happened. Sullivan's show ran on discipline and respect for the production process. Crosby treating the director like garbage violated that unspoken rule. It didn't matter that the Byrds were one of the biggest folk rock acts of the mid-60s. Crosby's ego cost the band future appearances on the most-watched variety show in America. To be fair, Crosby was known throughout his career for being difficult and speaking his mind without filters. But on Sullivan's show, that attitude was career poison. Number 10. The Mamas and the Papas. Their most famous Sullivan moment is tied to the show's strict lip-sync policy for musical performances. The group performed California Dreamin', mimed to a backing track, and Michelle Phillips held an Ate a Banana in a way many viewers interpreted as an obvious "we're not really singing" gag. The popular myth is that it was a deliberate protest against being forced to lip-sync on television. Later fact-checking notes that the protest framing isn't fully settled, and the banana thing may have been more random and playful. What's solid is the underlying friction friction point between rock performers and television producers. Sullivan-era variety TV demanded controlled, clean performances, and anything that looked like mocking the format risked getting permanently banned. The show's rules required miming for technical reasons, and the band's on-camera behavior made it look like they were undermining the production. Sullivan took it as disrespect and mockery of his show. The incident became legendary in rock history as an example of the tension between authentic musicians and artificial television requirements. Many viewers watching that night knew exactly what was happening. The band wasn't even trying to hide. They weren't really singing. Other band members were barely moving their mouths in sync. The whole thing felt like a middle finger to the format. Sullivan and his producers were livid backstage. The story goes that Sullivan confronted them about making a mockery of his show. The band members allegedly played innocent. The banana became an iconic symbol of 1960s counterculture, pushing back against establishment television. The Mamas and the Papas were already successful with multiple hit songs, so they could afford the risk. Whether it was intentional protest or just goofing around, Sullivan didn't care. What mattered was that they made his show look ridiculous on national television. Number 11. Ingrid Bergman. Bergman became a massive national scandal because of her affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini while she was still married. The moral outrage spilled into politics and media coverage for months. Senators were denouncing her on the floor of Congress, calling her immoral. In that hostile climate, Sullivan and the network had strong financial incentives not to feature her because it could invite sponsor boycotts. Sullivan later used his platform to test public sentiment by asking viewers whether Bergman had paid enough penance. He reported that letters from viewers favored forgiveness, but she still did not appear on his stage during that long censorship period when she was considered publicly unacceptable. The not invited back dynamic here is less about personal dislike and more about Sullivan acting as gatekeeper for what mid-century television considered morally appropriate. Depending on who you ask, Sullivan either protected American values or caved to puritanical pressure from conservative groups. Either way, Bergman was kept off his show when she needed the exposure most. The whole situation shows how much control Sullivan had over the moral standards of American television. The Bergman case was particularly tragic because her acting talent was never in question. She was one of the greatest actresses of her generation, but her personal life choices made her untouchable on American television for years. Sullivan didn't ban her because of anything she did on his stage. He banned her because the court of public opinion demanded it. The Bergman situation also revealed the double standard of the time. Male entertainers could have affairs without facing the same level of permanent exile, but a woman leaving her husband for another man was treated as an unforgivable moral crime. The irony is that Bergman eventually won back American audiences through her overseas film work and won another Oscar, but those crucial years when she needed television exposure to stay relevant in America were lost forever. Other variety shows followed Sullivan's lead because nobody wanted to be the first to rehabilitate a controversial figure. Sullivan essentially had veto power over who could appear on American television during that era. The cultural gatekeeping showed that Sullivan's influence extended far beyond just his own show. He helped define what was morally acceptable for an entire medium. Number 12. Aretha Franklin. Franklin described being set to debut on the show and then getting shut down because the production decided her gown was too low cut for broadcast standards. In a Vanity Fair interview years later, she said that was the reason viewers never saw her on Sullivan. An example of old TV standards colliding with a performer who wasn't going to be visually edited into acceptability. Franklin was already a massive star by the time this happened. She'd had multiple hit records and was being called the Queen of Soul. But Sullivan's show treated her like she needed to pass some kind of dress code inspection. The whole situation was insulting to an artist of her stature. Sullivan's producers could have simply asked her to bring a different gown. Instead, they bumped her after rehearsals were already happening. That's humiliating for any performer, but especially for someone of Franklin's caliber. The decision revealed the double standard for black female performers on television. White female guests wore evening gowns all the time without this level of scrutiny, but Franklin's appearance had to meet some stricter, undefined standard. She never forgot the slight and never appeared on the show. Sullivan missed out on one of the greatest voices in American music history because of a wardrobe complaint. It's one of the more embarrassing moments in the show's legacy. The timing made it even worse because this was during the peak of Franklin's crossover success to mainstream audiences. Sullivan's show could have introduced her to millions of viewers who didn't listen to R&B radio. Instead, those viewers missed seeing one of the most powerful live performers of the era. Franklin went on to legendary status without needing Sullivan's validation. But the incident highlighted how black artists faced extra hurdles that white performers never encountered. The dress code excuse revealed the underlying discomfort some television executives had with women's presentation. Franklin's rejection was about control and who got to define what was appropriate for American living rooms. Which of these guests do you think crossed the line the most with Ed Sullivan? Did he have a right to blacklist performers and other musicians who broke his strict rules, or was he just a control freak who couldn't handle being challenged on his own TV show? These incidents show how much power one man's decision televisions an entire show had over American entertainment and popular culture during the golden age of live television. Let us know what you learned from this video down below. And if you want more deep dives into classic television moments and the scandals behind them, click the subscribe button and watch another one of our videos on screen.